Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Honourable Vice President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the Vice President.
Honorable Senators, I wish to advise that the President of the Senate, Senator the Honorable Christine Kangaloo, is currently acting as President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator Dr. Lester Henry, who is out of the country, and to Senator Sophia Choate, SC, who is ill. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency, the Acting President, Christine Kangaloo. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, Acting President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, to Ms. Alicia Romano. Whereas the President of the Senate has temporarily vacated her office of Senator to act as President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, now, therefore, I, Christine Kangaloo, Acting President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44 of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Alicia Romano, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 5th of December 2017 and continuing during the acting appointment of Senator the Honorable Christine Kangaloo as President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President, St. Anne's, this 4th day of December 2017. To Ms. Ayana Lieber-Lewis, Whereas Senator Dr. Lester Henry is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Christine Kangaloo, acting president as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Ayana Liba Lewis, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 5th of December 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Dr. Lester Henry, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, this 4th day of December 2017. To Pastor Clive Dutton. Whereas Senator Sophia Choate SC is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of illness, I, Christine Kangaloo, acting president as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Pastor Clive Dutton, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 5th of December 2017 and continuing during the absence by reason of illness of the said Senator Sophia Choate SC, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, this 5th day of December 2017. Honorable Senators, Senators are required to take the oath.
I, Alicia Romano, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Ayana Lewis, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I'm about to enter.
I, Clive Dutton, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do affirm by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Honourable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. From Mr. Esmond Ford, MP, Deputy Speaker, on December the 4th, 2017. Reappointment of Joint Select Committees. At a sitting held on Friday, December the 1st, 2017, the House of Representatives agreed to the following resolutions. 1. Be it resolved that the House agreed to the following appointments to Joint Select Committees. Mr. Randall Mitchell in lieu of Mr. Faris Alwari on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. Mrs. Sherry-Ann Krishlo-Coburn in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Mr. Terence Dialsing in lieu of Ms. Marlene McDonald on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Dr. Lovell Francis in lieu of Mr. Stuart Young on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the Tobago House of Assembly. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Faris Alwari on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the Tobago House of Assembly. Mr. Adrian Leonce in lieu of Ms. Marley McDonald on the Public Accounts Committee. Dr. Nayan Gadsby-Dolly in lieu of Ms. Shampa Kojo on the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. And Brigadier General Retired Ansel Antwine in lieu of Mr. Maxie Coffey on the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee. 2. Resolved that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Cybercrime Bill 2017. Mr. Faris Alwari, MP, Major General Retired Edmund Dillon, MP, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, MP, Ms. Shampa Kojo, MP, Dr. Rudal Munilal, MP, and Mr. Barry Padarat, MP. 3. Resolved that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016. Mr. Colm Imber, MP, Mr. Faris Alwari, MP, Mr. Stuart Young, MP, Ms. Nicole Oliveri, MP, Mr. Ganga Singh, MP, and Mr. Rudanath Indar Singh, MP. I respectfully request that the Senate be informed of these decisions at the earliest convenience, please. Honourable Senators, in accordance with Standing Order 79-2, I wish to make the following appointments to the Sessional Select Committees for the 3rd session 2017-2018 of the 11th Parliament. Standing Orders Committee, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Member, Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Member, Mr. Wade Mark, Member, Mr. Dhanayshar Mahabir, Member. House Committee, Mr. Franklin. Go ahead.
Clarification, on the Standing Orders Committee, the independent bench had appointed Senator Roach. I'm supposed to be on the Business Committee, so I don't know if we can correct that, but that's an error.
All right, we will have it checked and verified if such is the case. Continuing, House Committee, Mr. Franklin Khan, Chairman, Mr. Foster Cummins, Member, Mr. Daniel Duki, Member, Ms. Khadija Amin, Member, Mr. Paul Richards, Member. Committee.
Yes, is that a House Committee, Mr.?
That's House Committee,
okay,
yes.
very well.
Committee of Privileges. Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman. Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Member. Mrs. Jennifer Batiste Primus, Member. Mr. Wade Mark, Member. Ms. Sophia Choate, Member. Statutory Instruments Committee. Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman. Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Member. Mr. Rohan Sinanan, Member. Mr. Gerald Ramdeen, Member. Mr. David Small, Member. Business Committee. Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman. Mr. Franklin Khan, Member. Mrs. Paula Gopi-Skoon, Member. Mr. Wade Mark, Member. And Dr. Dhanayshar Mahabir, Member.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The audited financial statements of the National Schools Dietary Services Limited for the financial year ended September 30, 2016. The audited financial statements of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year September 30, 2016. And the annual audited financial statements of the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited for the year ended September 31st, 2016. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the supplementary order paper in my name. The Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment Regulations 2017. Thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper and the supplemental order paper in the name of the Minister of Public Administration and Communication and in my own name. The response of the Statutory Authority Service Commission Department to the fourth report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11 Parliament, on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. The response of the Service Commission Department to the fourth report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11 Parliament, on the examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the fourth report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11 Parliament, on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. The Dental Profession Amendment of the Schedule Order 2017, the ministerial response to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to the eighth report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, second session 2016-2017, 11 Parliament, on the examination of the audited financial statements of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, NGC, for the financial years 2009 to 2015.
Reports from committees.
Senator the Honorable Clarence Rambrat.
Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to present the following report as listed on the supplemental order paper in the name of Senator Sophia Choate, Senior Counsel. The third report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs, third session 2017-2018, 11th Parliament, on an inquiry into commercial banking fees in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To the Prime Minister, given that the Children's Authority's 2016 report confirmed that 5,522 reports of child abuse were received in 2016, and approximately 6,000 reports are anticipated for 2017. What urgent strategies are being implemented to alleviate child abuse in this country?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this administration takes the abuse of any citizen very seriously, and we will do everything within our power to protect both women and, in this particular case, children. The first thing we'd like to put on record is the Senator has suggested there'll be approximately 6,000 reports anticipated. We don't know where he gets that information from. But in any event, we are working very closely and providing the maximum amount of resources to the Children's Authority and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, where there's a special unit to deal with children and child abuse. And this administration will do everything within its power to ensure it's properly resourced and to work towards the proper implementation of the law that the other side left completely unimplemented.
Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice President, could the Honorable Minister indicate to this House whether the government is concerned about the rise or the rate or the number of cases as it relates to reports of child abuse in Trinidad and Tobago. Is the government concerned about that level?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Senator Mark, for the opportunity to repeat once again that this government is very concerned and will do everything within its power, unlike the former administration where you have a former Attorney General who did not implement the law and is now taking cases to court to try and make God alone knows what on the Treasury and to our expense. But yes, this government is very concerned and is doing everything within its power to protect the children of Trinidad and Tobago.
Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice President, could the Honourable Minister indicate what appropriate resources, as you have indicated in your opening statement, would the government be focusing on allocating to the Children's Authority with a view to reducing the number of reported cases in 2018, given what we have seen in 2017?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
The government has not limited its resources to the Children's Authority. The country will soon see the launch of specific courts to deal with children and, of course, to deal with child abuse. We've been working with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with protocols to deal with how to specifically deal with questions with child abuse. With respect to child abuse, the Children's Authority, for the first time, is working very properly and consistently with the Office of the Prime Minister to ensure that all attempts are made to reduce the number of cases of child abuse. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, so as I said, they are being provided with the necessary resources, for example, money, but also working closely with the Office of the Attorney General to ensure they get proper assistance to deal with these cases.
Senator Mark, next question. No more supplementary questions. Next question, Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To the Honourable Minister of National Security. Given that for the month of December, there have been 16 murders, and Mr. Vice President, I understand 4 took place in the last few hours. In 4 days, can the Minister indicate the urgent mechanisms being put in place to stem the escalating murder rate?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I answer as the Acting Minister of National Security. Mr. Vice President, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, just yesterday we had a meeting out of the Ministry of National Security with all of the heads of our various law enforcement agencies. The government remains very concerned about the loss of any life in Trinidad and Tobago. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, that is the Acting Commissioner of Police and the Deputy Commissioner of Police, along with the Chief of Defence Staff, other heads of police divisions, as well as our prison services and our intelligence services, are working assiduously on trying to reduce the number of murders. This includes trying to reduce the number of guns in Trinidad and Tobago, and despite what Senator Mark said a short while ago, the first report I received this morning from the Deputy Commissioner of Police is that last night they were able to prevent a number of individuals who were going out to commit crimes with firearms and suspected murders. So the police service is working, and between now and Carnival, we can expect to see a rise in the police presence in Trinidad and Tobago. And we in the government, unlike the opposition, continue to encourage the police service and the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force and other law enforcement agencies in carrying out their duties, and we thank them for the duties they carry out.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. May I also pose to the acting Minister of National Security the following question. In view of the fact that firearms, based on what you have submitted, appears to be the weapon of choice in the committing of such heinous crimes, could the Honorable Minister indicate to this House what new initiatives are being taken by the police and the security services through the government to stem this rising tide in terms of access to firearms in Trinidad and Tobago?
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice President, I'd like to remind the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that when we came in as an administration, one of the first things we found was that those who were formerly in power, those who are now in opposition, had actually dismantled the security apparatus in Trinidad and Tobago and left very porous borders, left a very porous PRCO and other places.
Could you just please allow the Acting Minister of National Security to answer the question? Urgent questions do not have very much time in relation to the order paper, so all interruptions sort of extends that time and defeats the purpose of urgent questions in this House. Minister of National Security. Continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I'm a little disappointed at the type of behavior we're experiencing in this House here today. Mr. Vice President, what we as a government are doing and what the National Security Service apparatus are doing is not only have we rebuilt what they dismantled, and they dismantled intentionally, but we have also provided them with further resources, especially in the intelligence gathering area of national security, and it is working because we've actually seen a rise in the amount of firearms, illegal firearms that have been taken off the street under this administration, unlike those who provided contracts to the criminal element on the other side previously.
Yeah. Senator Ramdeen.
Given that for the month of December, there have been 16 murders in 4 days, can the minister indicate the urgent mechanisms being put in place to stem the escalating murder rate?
Senator Ramdeen, are you re-asking the urgent question that Senator Mark
just trying to get the answer, Mr. Vice President. Sorry?
Take a seat, please. Senator Mark asked the question, an answer was given, and a supplementary question came to the Honourable Minister based on the answer that he was given. Therefore, I will not allow you to re-ask the question. As a second supplementary question, we now move on as the urgent question time has ended.
Questions on notice, questions for all answer.
Mr. Vice President, I'm pleased to announce that the government will be answering all the questions listed on the order paper here under oral answers, and we ask for a deferral on written answers to question number 33 for 2 weeks.
Sorry, question number 30? 33, okay.
Mr. President, Vice President, may I, with your leave, seek your indulgence through the leader of the government business to inquire what is happening to written responses to question number 13 and question 21, which, as you know, were due.
Okay, leader of government business.
Question number 13 and question number 21, if you were absent last week, these were deferred for 2 weeks. Yeah.
All right, Senator Mark, question number 4.
Well, no problem. Mr. Vice President, through you, question number 4 to the Honorable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Vice President, the delay in disbursement of gratuity and pension payments to retired public servants is due to administrative issues in the Treasury Division and not due to the financial constraints currently facing us. To improve the efficiency of processing gratuity and pension payments at the Treasury Division, several solutions have been identified. 6 retired officers were hired on short-term contract to assist in the computation and checking of pension files. These officers previously worked at the Treasury Division and have extensive experience in pension matters. The organizational structure of the Pensions Management Branch has also been reviewed with the aim of addressing the issue of inadequate staffing. Recommendations for additional staff will soon be submitted to Cabinet. In order to strengthen the capacity of the pension and leave units at ministries and departments, the following measures were undertaken. We initiated discussions with permanent secretaries to emphasize the problems faced with the non-submission of documents, the submission of incorrect documents, and the submission of inaccurate or inadequate information, with particular emphasis on pension and leave records. We drafted a circular entitled Payment of Retiree Benefits on Time, which addresses the preparation, maintenance, and timely submission of pension and leave records. This circular is currently being finalized and will soon be distributed to all ministries and departments. And we collaborated with the Ministry of Public Administration and Communication and the Personnel Department to deliver training to ministries and departments on the accurate preparation of pension and leave records. The Pensions Management Branch is currently evaluating the possibility of decentralizing the process for the payment of contract gratuities to contract officers, including records verification and payments by the respective ministries and departments. In March 2017, the Pensions Management Branch also requested that accounting officers in all ministries and departments identify liaison officers to deal solely with pension matters, including queries. Liaison officers have since been assigned to deal directly with the Pensions Branch on all pension and leave-related matters. The Treasury Division is currently undertaking a business process re-engineering exercise. Some of the internal business processes are being re-engineered with a view to improving the processing time for pensions and leave payments, as well as identifying and addressing any duplication of task. The Ministry of Public Administration and Communications acquired a pensions module which can be integrated into the IGP, IHRS system and fully automates the pension process. The Treasury Division is currently developing a request for proposal which will clearly identify the functional requirements of the modern pension system, as well as ensure that government's pension rules are configured for successful implementation of the module. Mr. Vice President, these solutions, once fully implemented, would reduce delays in the disbursement of gratuities and pensions and improve the timeliness of gratuity and pension payments to retired public officers. The move towards the full automation of the pension and gratuity payment system over the next 3 to 5 years will solve the current issue and ensure that gratuities and pensions are paid immediately upon retirement. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Could the Honorable Minister indicate whether in the short term there could be some improvement in retirees being able to access their pensions through the engagement of more personnel rather than the 6 that you have mentioned?
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, in reviewing the problems with the system, we identified that there were problems both at the Treasury Division and in the ministries. In a lot of the cases, the issue lays with not getting the files on a timely manner from the ministries. So merely engaging more people at the Treasury Division will not solve the problem, which is why we are taking a multi-pronged approach in order to resolve the problem. In addition to that, engaging several people who don't have the experience in this area, we don't think will add much to improving the system. So we have decided to, at this point in time, engage the 6 experienced people who will review the system as they try to improve it, and as they make recommendations for additional improvements, we will take them on board and act accordingly.
Senator Ramdeen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, through you to the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. Could the Honorable Minister tell us at present, what is the average time that a retiree waits in order to get access to their gratuity and pension payments presently?
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Vice President, unfortunately, I'm not able to give that information. It varies from case to case.
Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice President, is the Minister aware that there are thousands of retirees from both the public service, central government, as well as local government, whose applications for pensions have been languishing at the Treasury for between the period of 1 year to 4 years? Are you aware of this?
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senator Mark, I would remind you that this is not a new issue. It is an issue that has existed for quite some time. This administration is seeking to deal with it, and I think we have put really robust systems and processes in place to try to deal with it as soon as possible. We are aware that people are suffering as a result of not getting their pensions on a timely basis. This administration is committed to addressing that, and we are doing that through the measures that I outlined earlier.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Do you think, Honorable Minister, that an interest should be charged on the government for late payments that are due to citizens who have served this country and are waiting for years to collect their entitlement? Do you think that the time has come for the government to institute such a measure in order to ensure that justice is done for those who are awaiting their just entitlements?
Senator, I won't allow that question. Next question. Senator Mark.
Is it the next question or next supplemental? Next question. I've exhausted my supplemental.
Yeah, oh yes, you've exhausted your supplemental on question number 4.
Okay. Well, may I go to the next question, sir?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. To the Honorable Acting Minister of National Security, question number 5, sir.
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this question is slightly misleading in that it refers to reports. We are not aware of reports. There's a singular report, and the continued misconstruction of information and the unpatriotic behavior by those on the other side is not something that we encourage in what we...
That kind of behavior from this gentleman, for him to come to this house and describe us as unpatriotic.
Senator.
Withdraw. He has to withdraw that, sir. Sorry about that, sir. But we can't tolerate it.
No, your apology is late.
Senator Ramdeen. I'm on my feet. Honorable Minister, please answer the question and try to refrain from phrases or sentiments where you are accusing the other side in relation to that on how they ask questions, specifically because the questions would have been approved by a particular presiding officer, and therefore if they're on the other paper, giving any kind of prejudgment as to or imputations as to what would have gone into the question, leave that for the presiding officer. So please answer the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I see the behavior continues. The Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security has undertaken several initiatives aimed at advancing counter-human trafficking efforts within Trinidad and Tobago. These include sensitization of frontline and border personnel and officers. In collaboration with the Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, the unit has embarked on a bilingual, which means you can speak more than one language, anti-trafficking campaign at airports to sensitize airport staff and officers on the indicators of human trafficking and the reporting protocols. Also, information sharing. Officers routinely compile and submit actionable information to share with relevant government agencies and source countries to assist in disrupting the activities of identified suspects overseas, recruiting of potential victims in source countries, and in adversely affecting their entry into Trinidad and Tobago and the issuance of relevant permits and visas. We're also working on building local partnerships. Partnerships have been entered into with Labour Inspectorate and other security agencies to proactively identify suspicious employers and potential victims. Building of regional partnerships. The unit is in continuous pursuit of new ways to identify possible victims of sex and labor trafficking who have left Trinidad and Tobago. Disruptive operations, as we see happening continuously. Priority is also given to collaborative effects with law enforcement personnel to conduct disruptive operations at reportedly known places of ill repute to deter the demand for commercial sexual activity. Offer of specialized services in collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Health, the Children's Authority, NGOs, and other governmental agencies. The unit is seeking to formalize special services to male, female, and child victims of trafficking. Community sensitization and anti-human trafficking campaigns are continuously on way and are being utilized. Mr. Vice President, the CTU in developing responses to this situation is guided by the deliberations of the National Task Force, which comprises the Ministers of National Security, Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Labour, Education, Social Development and Family Services. And this government does not accept for a moment that Trinidad and Tobago has become a destination, transit, and source country for adults and children to be subjected to sexual trafficking and forced labor.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Could the Honourable Minister share with this House data or any statistics that deals with the issue of trafficking of adults and children, as the question asks whether the government can provide us with any data or statistics as it relates to the numbers, Mr. Vice President, involved in this nefarious trade?
I won't allow that supplementary question, Senator Mark. Are there any other supplementary questions in relation to this question? No? Next question. Senator Mark, question number 6.
Yes, thank you. Question number 6 to the Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Information received from the Immigration Division and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for the reporting period of the U.S. Trafficking in Persons Report, which was for the period of April 1st, 2016 to March 31st, 2017, indicates that no reports were received, nor any evidence presented that implicated any police officer or immigration officer in the facilitation of sex trafficking. It is instructive to note that Trinidad and Tobago has shown noticeable improvements in its ranking with respect to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, moving from a watch list country in 2016 to a Tier 2 country in 2017. Mr. Vice President, this administration, once again, through the hard work of the Ministry of National Security and the Office of the Attorney General, took us from a position pre-September 2015 that was very, very deleterious and very, very unfortunate under the previous administration. And we've been moving up the ranks in what we've been doing. This country's current rank demonstrates that although the government does not fully meet the TVPA's minimum standards, it's making significant efforts in this regard. In furtherance of these efforts, a number of measures are in place to deter persons, including public officials, from facilitating sex trafficking. The Trafficking in Persons Act, Chapter 1210, Section 3, imposes penalties on persons for the commission of offences under the Act, Further, Mr. Vice President, for officials or public officers who commit offences under this Act, strict liability is prescribed in the form of imprisonment for 25 years upon conviction on an indictment. In addition, the Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security is continuously involved in proactive investigations based on intelligence and information received. Sex trafficking is a subset of human trafficking. The unit is actively engaged in educating the public on the human trafficking phenomenon, what constitutes this crime, who can be offenders, what signs to look for in persons who may be victims of the crime, and where reports on this crime can be made. The unit's philosophy holds that the more sensitized persons they are, the less likely they are for opportunities to arise for would-be perpetrators, including public officials, to facilitate human trafficking and, by extension, sex trafficking.
Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice President, could the Honourable Minister indicate whether there are any immigration or police officers who are under investigation for this particular type of behavior described in that particular report that I have mentioned, the U.S. latest report?
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. Once again, I repeat myself that information received from the Immigration Division and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for the reporting period indicate that no reports were received, nor any evidence presented that implicated any police officer or immigration officer in the facilitating of sex trafficking.
Senator Mark.
Could the Honourable Minister indicate to this House whether, as Acting Minister of National Security on behalf of the government, would he be taking appropriate steps to have this report that is now public and is worldwide, that serious allegations are being made, and given what he has indicated to us, whether he's prepared to rectify this matter by writing the U.S. authorities, because they have this in their report. So whether the minister is prepared to write to the United States denouncing this falsity in the report that they have been spreading and is worldwide on Trinidad and Tobago.
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to report, Mr. Vice President, that this government and this administration, under the substantive Minister of National Security, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the Attorney General, and myself, have been in communication with the U.S. authorities, and we have been working with them to see what can be done.
Senator Ramkisoon.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. During this time, this year, 2017, in social media, there was circulating an incident involving an immigration officer and a foreigner. This social media went on to say exactly what Senator Mark's question is alluding to. Now, given that the minister has responded and said there's no reports or no persons under investigation, and he listed a number of measures that are in place, what then can he advise us if any persons have been charged or investigated under the measures that you have listed that are existing presently?
Minister.
Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I am not aware of the social media video, but what I can do is I can ask the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Immigration Unit to speak to Senator Ramkisoon. After this sitting, I'll ask them to make contact with her, and she can provide them with the information.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Good afternoon, everyone. Question number 27 to the Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, and thank you, Honourable Senator Richards, for the question and the opportunity to put it on the parliamentary record. With respect to part 1, the question cannot be answered simply by providing a number. The number of units unoccupied at any time varies based on units completed and units distributed. On October 1st, 2015, the new administration met 1,200 houses that were unoccupied for reasons of vandalism, general disrepair, abandonment, and for reasons where the development would have been left in abeyance. Over the period October 1, 2015 to September 30th, 2017, the corporation began a program to speed up the completion and the repair, where necessary, and the distribution of housing units. So, as at September 30th, 2017, the number of available unoccupied units stood at less than 200. These units will be distributed by the end of 2017. With respect to Part 2, this again cannot be answered simply with a number. Cumulatively, over the period October 2015 to September 2017, a total of 181 units were reported and confirmed as being illegally occupied.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Through you, can the Minister indicate the measures being taken by the government to remove the persons who illegally occupy these units, and what time frame that will be done in?
Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you again. At the HDC, there is a program carried out by the security unit, where they go to all the various developments and they conduct audits, and where illegal occupiers are found, they conduct, along with the police service, they conduct eviction exercises. So that's an ongoing process.
Senator Richards.
Mr. Vice President, given the challenges we've seen for many years in terms of eviction of those units, particularly those that have children involved, is there a particular protocol that advises that eviction process, in addition to what you've outlined?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you again. The HDC has within its organization a social department, and along with the Ministry of Social Development, they treat the cases and make decisions or recommendations going forward.
Senator Dutton.
I would like to applaud and perhaps congratulate this present Minister of Housing for the courage he's showing in dealing with what I think is a very high-risk activity. I just want to ask through you, Mr. Vice President, if, I mean, we spoke privately, but if there's a plan in terms of gangs occupying unoccupied areas and the potential, threat to those after the gangs are removed to people who occupy them legally. God bless.
Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Senator Dottin. The HDC and its security department works with the Joint Protective Services in these matters. There will come a time where gang-related activities are concerned, where the HDC removes itself, and it then becomes a police matter.
Senator Richards.
Thank you again, Mr. Vice President. Through your question number 28 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you again, Senator Richards. Cumulatively, a total of 190 units, inclusive of illegally occupied units, were reported vandalized during the period October 1, 2015 to September 30th, 2017. These units appear to have been vandalized as a result of remaining unoccupied for extended periods of time. The cost to repair the reported vandalized units amounted to $18 million, VAT inclusive. The HDC and the Ministry continue to ensure that these units are occupied as soon as they become available to reduce the incidence of vandalism.
Senator Richards.
Mr. Vice President, can the Minister indicate the types of damage that has been done, and if these units are in any particular area, more profoundly?
Honourable Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To answer the last question first, no, it's all across Trinidad. And secondly, there are varying levels of vandalism, from the removal of doors, the removal of windows, the removal of plumbing, or a combination of all of the above.
Senator Richards.
Can the Minister indicate, through you, Mr. Vice President, if some of these vandalized units also are within the realm of units that are occupied and may have been vandalized by the occupants themselves, legal or illegal?
Honourable Minister of Housing.
Yes, in the case of illegally occupied units, we would have found that there would have been some vandalism on eviction.
Who's next? Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Question number 30 to the Minister of Planning and Development.
Thank you very much, Senator Richards. Mr. Vice President, the Town and Country Planning Division as the agency with responsibility for the administration of physical planning prepared the first and only statutory National Physical Development Plan for Trinidad and Tobago, which was approved by Parliament in 1984. In an effort to update the plan, which had a 20-year horizon, Cabinet, by minute number 3556, dated December 19, 2013, approved the National Spatial Development Strategy, which is a broad strategic policy framework within which more detailed regional and local planning could be undertaken. The NSDS is to be reviewed every 5 years and is expected to be revised by the Town and Country Planning Division during 2018. Notwithstanding the above, regional and local area plans, policies, and standards are continuously being reviewed and revised by the Town and Country Planning Division in collaboration with key stakeholders. Policies such as the increased residential density policy, the development of standards to guide urban design, and the revision of the hillside policy will be used in the updating of the National Land Use Policy. Mr. President, Senator Richards, the only approved National Physical Development Plan is the 1984 plan, and it is anticipated that when the NSDS is reviewed, that the plan will be brought to the Parliament to be debated and determined as the new National Physical Development Plan.
Senator Richards.
Thank you again, Mr. Vice President. Can the Minister indicate if, while that process is ongoing and the 2018 iteration is completed, there's research being done on illegal expansions, because at one instance you indicated that there's a challenge with curtailing that sort of activity in terms of land space and population density in Trinidad and Tobago, resulting in flooding in some instances, and the state not having access in some instances to lands for development.
Honourable Minister of Planning and Development.
At present, the Town and Country Planning Division is in the process of reviewing the mechanism that it uses for enforcement in order to ensure that enforcement takes place with regard to illegal construction that has been taking place. We have also established a committee that is chaired by the Minister of Planning and Development to examine large-scale development in Trinidad and Tobago, and to ensure that the developers progress in such a way that is in keeping with the developmental standards, not necessarily the standards that are set here, but standards that look at the future and also within the remit of the law, and to prevent the kind of flooding that has been taking place.
Senator Richards.
Minister, can you indicate at one instance in your response in this very House that one of the operationalizing mechanisms is the local government agencies, where the resources are quite stretched thin? It's part of the remit of your ministry and by extension the government, strengthening the capability of those local government agencies to monitor and bring illegal development to your attention so that remedies can be in place.
President, one of the issues is in fact the fact that there aren't very many land use planners in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things as the Ministry of Planning and Development, we have the remit for manpower planning, and that is one of the areas that the ministry has put forward to the Cabinet as an area for increasing the number of persons who get scholarships for that particular area. But it also means that young people and scholarship winners want to go and do land use planning, and it has not been an area that people necessarily want to go and study.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I hereby seek leave to move the adjournment of the House today under Standing Order 17 for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the failure of the government to address the escalating and uncontrollable wave of murders in Trinidad and Tobago. The matter is definite because it pertains specifically to the failure of the Minister of National Security and, by extension, the government to address the rapid escalation and the unprecedented increase in the number of murders in Trinidad and Tobago. The matter is urgent because over the last 4 days, there has been 16 murders, totaling 460 confirmed murders for the year. The matter is urgent because the total number of murders for 2016 was 462, which clearly indicates the government's continuous failure to address the rampant violent crimes throughout the country. The matter is of public importance because the increasing number of murders is engendering widespread fear and distress in our country. As a result of the spiraling crime, our citizens are not only subject to physical harm, but also psychological harm, where they continue to feel unsafe, insecure, vulnerable, helpless, and powerless to the criminal powers. The matter is of public importance because the United States government continue to warn travelers about the escalating crime, and this damage to our economy inevitably trickles down and places an additional burden on our citizens. I so move, Mr. Vice President.
Honourable Senators, I have considered the motion of the Senator, and I am not satisfied that this matter as presented qualified under this standing order.
Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, having regard to the correspondence from the Deputy Speaker of the House in relation to the appointment to the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Cybercrime Bill 2017, I beg to move that the following 6 senators be appointed to serve on the committee. Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Mrs. Paula Gopi-Schoon, Mr. Ronald Huggins, Mr. Wade Mark, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, and Mr. Paul Richards.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate agree with the appointment of the following senators to serve on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Cybercrime Bill 2017. Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Mrs. Paula Gopi-Schoon, Mr. Ronald Huggins, Mr. Wade Mark, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, and Mr. Paul Richards. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Vice President, having regard to the correspondence from the Deputy Speaker of the House in relation to the appointment to the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016, I beg to move that the following 6 senators be appointed to serve on the committee: Mr. Foster Cummins, Mr. Robert Luhunt, Ms. Alison West, Mr. Wade Mark, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, and Mr. Paul Richards.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Senate agree with the appointment of the following senators to serve on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016. Mr. Foster Cummings, Mr. Robert Lee Hunt, Ms. Alison West, Mr. Wade Mark, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, and Mr. Paul Richards. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Honorable members, permit me to revert to item number 3 on the order paper in relation to announcements by the Vice President, where an error was pointed out by Senator Mahabir in relation to the appointment of senators to sessional select committees. I repeat, Standing Orders Committee, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Member, Mr. Clarence Arambarat, Member, Mr. Wade Mark, Member, and Mr. H.R. Ian Roach, Member.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Senator Wade Mark.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas the state-owned company Petrotrin is responsible for petroleum operations, including the exploration for, development of, and production of hydrocarbons, and the manufacturing and marketing of petroleum products. And whereas over the last 10 years, there has been a steady decline in the revenue generated from the energy sector due to the decline in the price of oil and gas, and also a reduction in oil production. And whereas it was reported in the media that one of Petrotrin's operators, A&V Oil and Gas Limited, overstated its level of production during the period January 2017 to the 11th of July 2017, resulting in Petrotrin having paid royalties for crude oil that was not received. And whereas recommendations were made by Petrotrin's Audit Committee that payments to A&V Oil and Gas Limited be withheld and the contract terminated due to the alleged misrepresentation of the operator, be it resolved that immediate action be taken by the Ministry of Finance as corporation sole to suspend this operator's contract while investigations into the Audit Committee's report are ongoing, and be it further resolved that the matter of the overstating of oil production be referred to the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises for inquiry and report. Mr. Vice President, this ugly and very horrible situation was made public and brought to the attention of the national community by the honorable leader of the opposition and political leader of the United National Congress and the next Prime Minister at a United National Congress, which was held on Sunday, the 9th of September 2017. It was at that particular Congress, Mr. Vice President, that the internal audit report was put into the public domain surrounding what was now, or what has now been popularly referred to as the fake oil scandal or the ghost oil debacle. Mr. Vice President, this situation arose as a result of developments that may have been occurring long before January to July of 2017. I believe it's the chairman of Petrotrin that has now ordered the audit committee to extend its investigation back into the entire 2016 period, Mr. Vice President. I think it's important, Mr. Vice President, for us to understand the very significance of Petrotrin as a state-owned entity and as a flagship company in the Republic of TNT. Mr. Vice President, Petrotrin is responsible for petroleum operations, inclusive of exploration and production of hydrocarbons and manufacturing and marketing of petroleum products. This company, Mr. Vice President, has been experiencing severe financial losses over the past 10 years. Petrotrin is a legacy company and is charged with the responsibility of paying dividends to the government by efficiently producing, manufacturing, and marketing hydrocarbon products. The management and board have the responsibility and accountability to organize and run the company efficiently to obtain this objective. But, Mr. Vice President, what is the current scenario or situation at this flagship company known as Petrotrin? Mr. Vice President, the company has a severe cash flow problem. The company is a loss-making operation as we speak. The company is in deep debt, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, there's a major bullet payment of $850 million due at the end of 2019 that Petrotrin must meet. Mr. Vice President, no initiatives to increase oil production have taken place despite highly trained personnel and 3D data. We have an outdated refining process and an inefficient use of energy and power to make products. The company is stuck to traditional markets as we speak. There's a non-application of new technology in exploration and production and refinery. There has been no board of directors direction to reorganize and point the company into a new product mix for the emergent fuel and transportation business. In other words, Mr. Vice President, there has been no serious restructuring plan at this particular company. Mr. Vice President, I bring this to your attention so that you can understand the background of this entity and the challenges that it has faced. It was in 1986 that Petrotrin commenced an initiative to boost oil production through farm-out and lease operatorship program, both internally and externally. That was a great idea, to boost production, because the company, as structured, had some 3,000 idle wells, which were uneconomic for Petrotrin to produce. And they were scattered, Mr. Vice President, over its producing fields. External operators were selected by a vigorous process and included a work program and a multi-tiered level of overriding royalty for oil as produced based on volume and price. Mr. Vice President, even in those early years, operators took the opportunity to seek personal benefits by stealing fiscalized oil that was recycled into production tanks. Back then, Mr. Vice President, 3 such operators were found, and they were investigated by Petrotrin, but they didn't have sufficient evidence as they got with A&V Oil and Gas. The first one that was discovered thieving, stealing, pilfering, siphoning oil from Petrotrin illegally was one called Lease Operators Limited, LOL. Not enough evidence. There's another one called Cardway, Mr. Vice President. Not enough evidence to convict them or to take them to prisons. And there's one called Venture Production that was also involved in the stealing of oil from Petrotrin. But again, not enough evidence to track them down and to take them down. This venture production has now been morphed into something called Trinity Oil and Gas today. Mr. Vice President, but the process has tightened since those incidents. The lease operatorship and farm-out program was morphed into something called production sharing contracts, in which operators met certain levels of production and was paid for an increased levels at over a declining rate. Mr. Vice President, the company in question, A&V Oil and Gas, was awarded what is called the Cat's Hill field by Petrotrin in 2009. And they got a license for 10 years. They were allowed to drill within the prescribed area. Mr. Vice President, this company drilled some 30-odd wells in less than 2 years and brought them into production. Mr. Vice President, it amounted to some $45 million. The question that has to be asked from the outset, where did a small operator within a 2-year period was able to source funds to drill in such a quick period? Which banks would have underwritten such operations? Or was it an arrangement involving Petrotrin and this small and virtually insignificant operator? We need to know, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the Cat's Hill field was developed first by Shell in the early 50s. Later on, Mr. Vice President, it was done by Trintoc, then later on by Petrotrin. And what happened, Mr. Vice President, is that it was confirmed by a reputable auditing firm called Gaffney and Klein, Gaffney and Klein, which is a fiercely independent petroleum group of auditors, and they are ranked very high in the world today, Mr. Vice President. They were able to show that the volumes that were being claimed by A&V could not have been actually true. They have confirmed that. It is a historical fact, Mr. Vice President, that, and people in the oil business will tell you, that new fields experience a decline of over 60% after initial production in the first year. But the question that has to be raised very early, Mr. Vice President, when we look at what is called the report, which I have a copy of, it is called, Mr. Vice President, or entitled, Investigation into the Volume Discrepancies between Crude Oil Produced by E&P, and that is exploration and production, and the crude oil pumped to R&M. And Mr. Vice President, you know, in the literature, there is a concept which I want to share with you that has emerged. And that concept is called tunneling. I want you to remember that term, tunneling. It's a process by which the stakeholders of a state-owned enterprise siphon resources out for their own personal gain. And hypothetically, the fake oil or ghost oil is a form of tunneling. And Mr. Vice President, the question that has to be raised is whether it might have been a possible delayed reimbursement for campaign finance. That is the question that is on the minds and lips of the citizenry, Mr. Vice President. Whether this situation that has taken place was all part of an installment plan. You pay me for the campaign, $20 to $30 million, so I could win the elections, and I will turn a blind eye to allow you to siphon oil in order to recover your investment. Was that part of the money laundering plan? Was that, Mr. President, these are questions that people are asking. They are asking, they are posing. And Mr. Vice President, what is even more frightening is this. We have to ask the question, how a gentleman by the name of Vidya Dioki Singh, who was a hospitality officer, got promoted to vice president from a hospitality officer, making sure your drinks are measured properly at functions. How come this gentleman, Mr. Vice President, was moved from the hospitality area into the exploration and production area? And you know when that took place, Mr. Vice President? The PNM won the elections in September of 2017, and on the 2015 rather. And Mr. Vice President, on the 29th of February 2016, a leap year, the gentleman leaped. He leaped into this area called E and P, and he was now responsible for determining how much money you pay for the oil that you say you are going to send to Petrotrin. That is a fellow called Vidya Dioki Singh. And Mr. Vice President, he was not only an alderman in the Superior Corporation, he was also a candidate screened by the PNM under the chairmanship of the Minister of Energy in 2015 for the Superior constituency. So, Mr. Vice President, hear what's going on. These people promoted this man. He had no experience as a hospitality officer into the E&P section in February of 2016. And when you read the internal audit report, Mr. President, about this gentleman and his fraudulent activities, this man should be facing jail sentence right now as we speak. But I want to ask the following question, Mr. Vice President. There's a gentleman called Mr. Neil Derrick. He's the Vice President of Human Resources, Petrotrin. I would like answers to questions that I am about to pose. What was the role of Mr. Neil Derrick in this bizarre transfer? Because I understand he's still the Vice President. Why was this gentleman, Dioki Singh, transferred in February of 2016 when he had no experience or knowledge of E&P? What were the reasons, Mr. Vice President, for this transfer? Whether the position of hospitality officer existed on the approved organizational structure of Petrotrin within that particular section, the E&P. Mr. Vice President, what is even more interesting is that not only this scandal that has emerged, seen one resignation, Professor Andrew Jupiter has gone back to UE or UTT. But we recently had the disappearance or the resignation, Mr. Vice President, of the president of Petrotrin. And the question that people are asking is whether there's a link between the fake oil scandal and the resignations of both Professor Andrew Jupiter as well as Mr. Fitzroy Harewood, who is the president of Petrotrin. That is what is being asked, Mr. Vice President. But I can tell you one thing about Andrew Jupiter. He's a very decent person, and he will not allow anybody to corrupt him. I know that about Andrew Jupiter, a very decent individual. So, Mr. Vice President, the question that therefore that must be asked, and Petrotrin must answer, is where did the instruction come from to move Mr. Dioki Singh from the position of hospitality officer to put him into the custody transfer section of the E&P section? Did it come from the political stratosphere? Where did it come from, Mr. Vice President? Mr. Vice President, this reeks of a giant conspiracy that implicates high office holders in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have to connect the dots, Mr. Vice President. This is not no easy situation that has occurred overnight, Mr. Vice President, because some of the players who are involved in this exercise, Mr. Vice President, have been operating together for a number of years. And they know about fake oil. And they know about stealing oil. And we need to get to the bottom of it, Mr. Vice President. I want to go to the report just to give you a little idea of what this report indicated. And I'm referring to this report, as I said, the audit report of August 17, 2017. They said, the report says on page 2, the impact of fraud is far-reaching. It says, Petrotrin has been paying the operator for oil it has not produced. Based on past and current production data, an optimistic estimate of production from the Cat's Hill field is somewhere between 1,400 and 1,600 barrels a day. Fiscalized sales as per sales ticket have averaged 5,000 barrels a day in the month of 2017. June alone, and we estimate that production for this month would have been overstated by some 90,000 barrels, which works out to be an overpayment of US $2.97 million. The internal audit estimates that for the period 2017 January to June, the Cat's Hill overstated its production by over 350,000 barrels. And Petrotrin would have had to overpay this company, A and V, over US $11.5 million.
Read that again. Read that again.
It was overstated. It is stated here that the Cat's Hill operation of A and V Oil and Gas overstated their production by over 350,000 barrels of oil. And Petrotrin had to pay that company US $11.5 million. Petrotrin also, Mr. Vice President, on fake oil, which turned out to be snake oil, which turned out to be ghost oil. You know what happened, Mr. Vice President? Petrotrin, in dire straits, had to pay royalties to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, amounting to US $1.86 million for crude oil never received during the 2017 January to June period. So Petrotrin, in dire economic straits, had to pay royalties to the government of Trinidad and Tobago for oil that Petrotrin never received. In US. And Mr. Vice President, it is worse than this. Petrotrin has been overstating its crude oil production as a result of this scandal. The data in the well information system for the Cat's Hill field is inaccurate. And therefore, Petrotrin has been sending inaccurate well tests and production information to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Affairs. Mr. Vice President, this was an elaborate conspiracy to defraud the people of TNT of hundreds of millions of dollars, whilst people are being retrenched, Mr. Vice President. And you know what is even more alarming? When this scandal broke out, the Prime Minister of this country was in California. And rather than call the Minister of Energy, who is also in trouble, instead of calling the chairman of Petrotrin, you know who he called? He called a fellow called Hanif Nazim Bash. And when he was asked whether that organization is a financier of the PNM, he said, I would be very disappointed if Mr. Hanif Nazim Bash does not finance the PNM or does not contribute to the financing of the PNM. So what the Prime Minister was indicating to the country and to the world is that that man called Hanif Bash is a leading financier of the People's National Movement. And Mr. Vice President, the government has to come clean. The Minister of Energy and Energy Industries have to come clean on this matter. Because I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, there are some dots that we have to connect. And I want to ask the minister, you kept on a fellow called Selwyn Lashley. You say he's a big permanent secretary. You keep him on. But what the Auditor General said about that ministry, Mr. Vice President, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry is in total chaos. Read it. Tell them. Total chaos. I want to ask the Minister of Energy if he's not aware. There's a fellow called Kenneth Oliver. He was a former advisor to the Minister of Energy, Nicole Olivier. I want the minister to tell this parliament whether he's aware that there was a breach of the ministry server and that particular individual may have been associated with that breach. I want the minister to tell us whether the server is the repository of all the ministry's vital information, including the confidential data of BP, Shell, AOG, and BHP Billington, among very important energy companies in TNT, and whether this gentleman was in possession of that particular arrangement. I also want him to tell us whether his current PS is in possession of a report on this entire fiasco. And why has the police in Trinidad and Tobago not been alerted to this crime that was committed by this advisor to Nicole Olivieri? Mr. Vice President, what it tells us is that there are dots that we have to connect. And why, for instance, the government has refused, Mr. Vice President, to terminate the contract of this particular company. Why? Because the Prime Minister called him and said, boy, how things going? Mr. Vice President, I'm not saying, I'm not making any or casting any aspersion against the Prime Minister. I'm just saying what he said in public. And all I'm asking, why is the government of Trinidad and Tobago not being involved or getting involved, Mr. Vice President, in this matter? Why? Why they're not getting involved? Mr. Vice President, this fellow called Dioki Singh, there is evidence in this report to show you. First of all, there was no testing done whatsoever while this man was involved in this action. No individual well testing was done under this gentleman who was responsible for overseeing this matter. What is even more alarming, Mr. Vice President, is that when they reviewed the record of this gentleman, and that is on page 16 of this report, it shows, Mr. Vice President, that when this gentleman was supposed to be actually taking information and reporting back to Petrotrin what is going on, the Auditor General is reporting, the auditor rather, is reporting instances when Mr. Dioki Singh was not present at Cats Hill at the time of the fiscalization was being done. So how was he able to measure? But you know what? You can't pay forestry workers. People cannot get physical support at the hospital. They can't get fencing and Cafinol. Mr. Vice President, CDAP has been literally withdrawn the card. Schools are closing down. Children and so on cannot go to school because the government cannot pay. Box lunches have been reduced. But you know, Mr. Vice President, while all that going on, the government, every one of them on that side, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, have remained silent in the face of fraud and open theft against the people of this country. And they are the ones who are talking, Mr. Vice President, about they are patriotic and that they are anti-corrupt. And And Mr. Vice President, you allowing this thing to go on? Why has the Minister of Energy and the government not taken action to terminate the contract of this gentleman? Why? I could tell you why. There's a gang, there's a clique. I wouldn't call them here, but I know them. 4 of them. 4 of them. There's eat, there's drink, there's lime, and there's plan how to thief the oil. I won't call the names. So, Mr. Vice President, there are instances when Mr. Deoki Singh was present at Cats Hill for very short periods of time, when the high gauges were being taken and therefore could not have been present for the entire fiscalization process, which, if done properly, can take at least 30 minutes. This man was never there. He went for 5 minutes and he disappeared. Mr. Vice President, how can we allow this to go on? And Mr. Vice President, we have to ask the Minister of Energy, where is Mr. Deoki Singh now? Where is Mr. Deoki Singh now, Mr. Vice President? He is not at Petrotrin. He's missing in action at Petrotrin. They removed him from the board of Lake Asphalt. The police, like the Petrotrin police, they're trying to locate him because he's a suspect and he's one of the persons that they want to investigate. They cannot even serve notice on Deoki Singh. He's missing. Where is he? Where is he, Mr. Vice President? And this is the gentleman, Mr. Vice President, who was brought on board by Petrotrin. And in that period, Mr. President, I want to quote on page 18 for you the following evidence. The internal audit, according to page 18, has concluded that during the period January the 1st, 2017 to July the 11th, 2017, there were instances when Mr. Deoki Singh was either not present for the fiscalization or was not there long enough for a proper fiscalization to be done. He would have therefore accepted the operator's high and low gauge figures without verifying these figures were in fact correct. He was therefore, hear what the audit says, Mr. Vice President. He was therefore a willing accomplice of the operator to defraud Petrotrin by overstating fiscalized volumes. He was a willing accomplice. It goes on. As a result, Petrotrin was actually paying for crude oil that was never produced, Mr. Vice President. It goes on. Internal audit is also concerned about the integrity of the sampling process used at the Cats Hill 3-level samples are supposed to be taken during fiscalization. Since Mr. Deoki Singh was not present on a number of occasions for the fiscalization, it is possible that there may have been sample tampering and Petrotrin may have been paying for higher quality crude than it was supposed to be doing. So, Mr. Vice President, the conduct of this gentleman is clear. The gentleman was involved in fraud. The gentleman was the point man for A&V Oil at Petrotrin. A&V Oil was aware that they were not producing the oil that they were claiming they were sending to Petrotrin Point-à-Pierre refinery. And yet still, Mr. Vice President, they were collecting. But I hear whenever some of these people go to South, they end up in a place called St. Francis Road. And they fed them, they drink them, they feed them, and Mr. President, like a farm, it's only chickens on the farm. Only chickens on the farm. And they have a frolicking good time, Mr. Vice President. All that was taking place, Mr. President, when the government of Trinidad and Tobago should have known, ought to have known, that this man was stealing, thieving oil. And the monies that the gentleman was spending on them was monies that belonged to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this matter is so serious that we call not only for this matter to be referred to the DPP. We want to know why this minister and his government has chosen to put a permanent secretary who is supposed to be regulating the industry and overseeing the industry. Why have you placed Lashley on the board of Petrotrin so that he could be your agent to report to you what's going on there? It is wrong to have Lashley on that board. And Mr. Vice President, we want to advance this evening that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, this hypocritical government, talks about transparency, talks about governance, talks about accountability. And Mr. Vice President, they do nothing about it. They are silent. We are calling on the government, if they are serious, to have this matter be referred to the DPP immediately. Mr. Vice President, we are saying that this matter is so serious that the police should be involved immediately in this matter. We are saying, Mr. Vice President, that those people were so bold, they were so strong, and they were so sure of the support of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that when ordinary newspaper people went to that place, they beat them, they brutalized them. They did it because, you know why? They had the support and backing of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. That is what they did, Mr. Vice President, and said they're going to sue. Sue who? How you get sue in your teeth? You should be in jail. That is what you should be doing, serving time in jail. So, Mr. Vice President, this matter is very, very serious. And I want to table a copy of this report, the audit report, because I think every member of the Senate ought to have a copy of this report. And through you, I'll ask the clerk to make copies of this report available to every member of the Senate so they can understand the implication. Mr. Vice President, you know what the government wanted to do? And they did it? They said, let us try to verify this report. Because they want to cover it up, eh? So they said, we're going to bring in a group called Kroll from Canada. Gaffney and Klein. It's Daphne? Gaffney, thank you. Gaffney and Klein. And Kroll. They have both confirmed that there is fraud at this place called Petrotrin involving A and V. Mr. Vice President, why has the government not acted to either suspend, Mr. Vice President, the contract or terminate the contract? Mr. Vice President, you know what we understand is taking place right now? It is being rumored that the government has given the green light to Petrotrin to allow A&V to continue producing oil. And they are producing oil and supplying oil to Petrotrin, Mr. Vice President. We are not too sure they are being paid, but we understand from rumors that are circulating that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has refused to suspend or terminate the contract of A&V Oil and Gas and is facilitating the continued operations of A&V Oil, and they are supplying, Mr. Vice President, oil to Petrotrin. Mr. Vice President, I know that my time is up, but this, Mr. Vice President, is a very, very serious matter. We have called on this Parliament, and we are calling on the government of this country. We want immediate action to be taken by the Ministry of Finance to suspend this operator's contract whilst investigations into the audit committee report are ongoing. And we also would have liked, not to bring this matter here, we would have liked the JSC on state enterprises, Mr. Vice President, to be responsible for conducting a proper inquiry into this matter. This was not to be, and hence we are debating this thing openly and publicly. We were hoping, not too late, for the government to have this matter referred to the JSC for a thorough investigation, Mr. Vice President, and inquiry into this entire scenario. So, Mr. Vice President, this fake oil, ghost oil scenario, we want the government to deal with the fraudster who has stolen the nation oil, and we want the government to take action by suspending this operator. The Minister of Energy, in an article in the newspapers, said that he was deeply troubled by this development. And I can understand why the minister is deeply troubled, because I believe the minister is in trouble.
No more financing for the PNM.
Because this is a situation, Mr. Vice President, in which we are not saying everything here today.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Mr. Vice President, we are not saying everything here today. This government is not going to be around for much longer. They cannot run the country. They cannot run the country. They cannot deliver the goods and services. And when they are supposed to take action against thieves and crooks and fraudsters, they turn a blind eye. How can the people, Mr. Vice President, how can the people tolerate that? How can the people continue to support a government that turns a blind eye to open theft, whilst our children cannot eat, they can't get food, workers are being retrenched in this country? All over the place, Mr. Vice President, total chaos and anarchy. 18 murders in 5 days or less. Where are we going? The government of Trinidad and Tobago should pack up and leave. You must call elections. You're brave? You're brave? Call elections. You're brave? You want to test your popularity? Call election, Mr. Vice President, and they'll all be wiped out. The people only waiting. Mr. Vice President, right now, the PNM is a walking dead. This is a dead government. The funeral is about to take place. It's a dead government. And Mr. Vice President, people are only waiting to bury them. That's all they're waiting on. All they are doing is fooling the country, fooling the people, and they are not doing anything to uplift the nation of our of this society. They are not uplifting the nation. So, Mr. Vice President, we serve notice on them, on the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that you could continue to fool yourself. You could continue to tell the country that you are the best thing after sliced bread. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And people are completely tired, frustrated, and fed up of the PNM. And what is going to cause the problem to worsen is not by trying to impose anti-gang laws on the country. That they are going to work. You have to deal with the reality. The reality is justice. Peter Tosh said in his famous words, all over, everybody crying for peace, but nobody crying out for justice. And that is what people are crying out for. Go and talk to the Beetham residents. Go and talk to the poor and the ordinary people. They are crying out for justice in this country. The PNM has betrayed the poor. Roger and the trade union movement has out the PNM light. When Roger and them could out the PNM light, Franklin Khan, I'm sorry, sir, Senator the Honorable Franklin Khan, all I'm telling you is that oxygen has run out. You are stretched out and you're just waiting to take your last breath. The people have had enough of you. And if you do not take action, Mr. Vice President, if they don't take action to deal with this matter, Mr. Vice President, the people, we are not only going to deal with it, but together with the people, we will deal with the PNM. I beg to move, Mr. Vice President.
Amin.
Mr. Vice President, I stand to second this motion and reserve my right to speak later in the debate.
The motion has been seconded by Senator Amin. Honorable Senators, I will now propose the question for debate. The question is, whereas the state-owned company Petrotrin is responsible for petroleum operations, including the exploration for, development of, and production of hydrocarbons, and the manufacturing and marketing of petroleum products, and whereas over the last 10 years, there has been a steady decline in the revenue generated from the energy sector due to the decline in the price of oil and gas, and also a reduction in oil production, and whereas it was reported in the media that one of Petrotrin's operators, ANV Oil and Gas Limited, overstated its level of production during the period of January 2017 to the 11th of July 2017, resulting in Petrotrin having paid royalties for crude oil that was not received, and whereas recommendations were made by Petrotrin's Audit Committee that payments to ANV Oil and Gas Limited be withheld and the contract terminated due to the alleged misrepresentation of the operator, be it resolved that immediate action be taken by the Ministry of Finance as corporation sole to suspend this operator's contract while investigations into the Audit Committee's report are ongoing, and be it further resolved that the matter of the overstating of action be referred to the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises for inquiry and report. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this morning at the JSC, when I saw Senator Mark in his new jacket, I knew he was coming to spit fire here today. And in some regards, rightfully so. But, Mr. Vice President, thank you for the opportunity to join this debate on the private motion on the issue of the alleged overstatement of production of crude oil by ANV Oil and Gas and matters pertaining thereto. Mr. Vice President, the chronology to this issue is that an internal audit report, confidential and privileged report, was leaked by the leader of the opposition at a political UNC meeting. However, the fact that there was a leak, the report still remains in the context of Petrotrin privileged and confidential. I speak in legal language here. In January 2017, the head of Petrotrin's Exploration and Production Department, Custody Transfer Department, informed internal audit that there had been increasingly monthly shortage of crude transferred from E&P compared to the volumes received at Point-à-Pied, and that this had been since 2016 August. Internal audit proceeded with an investigation, and this was completed and sent to Petrotrin President, dated August 17th, 2017. That's the report. It remains privileged and it remains confidential. Under normal circumstances, Mr. Vice President, Petrotrin would have acted on the report. The report was circulated widely on social media, and it is de facto a public document because Senator Mark says he's laying it in Parliament. But it remains privileged as far as Petrotrin is concerned. In an effort to remain transparent and, most important, to protect Petrotrin's commercial interests in this matter. Because everybody ranting and raving, but Paramount in this matter is the protection of Petrotrin's commercial interests as a company. The Board of Directors commissioned an independent forensic external auditor to conduct an independent evaluation. The company, as was mentioned, is School Consulting Canada Limited, who has vast experience in conducting exercises of this type. The company further, Petrotrin, also commissioned the global oil and gas consultant Gaffney Klein and Associates to conduct reservoir tests to see the capability of the delivery of the wells. So there's no issue of a cover-up. There's an issue of due process. And let me quote from Petrotrin's press release dated November 17, 2017. In reference to the company's internal audit department, and I quote, "The company's initial finding was confirmed in a report submitted by external consultant School Consulting Canada Limited, following the completion of the forensic audit commissioned by the company's board into the reported discrepancies. An additional report commissioned by global oil and gas consultant Gaffney Klein and Associates last week also found that the reservoir was not capable of producing the volume." That's Petrotrin's official press release. Where's the cover-up? In addition to auditing the period 2017, January to July, the board has since commissioned Petrotrin Internal Audit Department to widen the scope of its investigation into matters going back to 2016. Where's the cover-up? Following the board's receipt and review of Kroll's and Gaffney Klein's report, Petrotrin Chairman Wilfred Espiney has confirmed that the company would now be moving to take the appropriate actions internally and to bring the matter to the attention of the relevant authorities. Where is the cover-up? The chairman cautioned, however, that while the reports confirmed the discrepancy found by the internal audit, it was critical for the board to continue to exercise due care and deliberation in how it proceeded. Where is the cover-up? At this point in time, you need counsel. Am I right, counsel? All right, let's go on. He added, that is Chairman Espiney, and I quote, "While we plan to take decisive action, we need to ensure that any claim or action we take is not impeded by a misstep. In this case, doing it right is more important than doing it quickly." Let me repeat that. This is maturity in handling matters like these. This is not matters to play the fool with. Sorry for the language, Mr. Vice President. While we plan to take decisive action, we need to ensure that any claim or action we take is not impeded by a misstep. In this case, doing it right is more important than doing it quickly. And so it would be premature to articulate any specific action at this time. They're working on it. I now quote from an article on the 28th of November, Rosemary Sands in the Trinidad Guardian. And I quote Chairman Espiney again. He said, "While there is public sentiment that the matter is taking too long, Espiney said Petrotrin had moved with urgency to bring the forensic audit team. He said again, and I quote, "As soon as we were able to determine that there was consistency in their findings and the findings of the internal audit report, we went to the public. That's the press release I just read. But well thought out press releases. You're not jeopardizing your position in law. The chairman continued to say, the Kroll and Graf decline reports have been passed to, quote, people with specific competencies to deal with how we should go forward. In a matter like this, the Minister of Energy is not qualified to tell Petrotrin how to act. It is still with them, he says. We have no response from our people yet as to how we should move forward. But trust me, we are working on it. I got a brief from Petrotrin this morning, and let me just read it. It's called Petrotrin's legal position. And I quote, this matter is at a very sensitive stage. And at present, Petrotrin is taking senior counsel's advice. Premature disclosures could derail Petrotrin's legal position. We on this side wouldn't be loose with what we say, because it has far-reaching commercial impact on Petrotrin's operation. Because, Mr. Vice President, this is a country where we recognize and we honor due process. That is our jurisprudence. So sometimes in our haste to make issues public, I know ultimately the public has to be informed, but sometimes in our haste to make issues public, we could very well be jeopardizing our position to get the very outcome that we want. And that is the outcome of protecting Petrotrin and, by extension, the state's interests. That's the government's position. And that will continue to be our position. Due process, take it one step at a time as we be guided along a legal path as to what the remedies are and where we will take it further. I remain that the report is a privileged and confidential report, and by its being leaked to the public doesn't diminish the fact that in Petrotrin context, it remains privileged and confidential. I just want to go on record to say that as the line minister for Petrotrin, I am particularly happy and pleased with how the board has been handling this matter, with prudency, with judgment, with fairness, and I think the ultimate conclusions will be reached in due course, and I hope sooner rather than later. That is all I have to say on this matter, because it is a serious matter. But seeing that I'm on my feet, the whole issue of custody and oil transfers in Trinidad and Tobago, I just want to say a couple things on it. Trinidad and Tobago produces around 73,000 barrels of oil per day. Our crude could be categorized in three categories for sale. There's Galeota crude that is shipped out and exported through the Galeota terminal. The Galeota crude includes 12,000 barrels of oil per day from BP, which is condensate production, and approximately 12,000 barrels a day from Perenco, which is the old TSP field, Teak, Saman, and Pui. That amounts to around 25,000 barrels of high-quality crude that is exported through the terminal in Galeota. and which comes under Ministries of Energy supervision. The Ministry of Energy staff, which is the petroleum inspectors, they inspect and monitor and sanction the sale of crude, because that is crude that is leaving the country and is being exported to a foreign land. Those figures are critical in terms of how we calculate our royalties and our taxes, and including transparent disclosure by the multinationals. Incidentally, that's a high-quality crude. It fetches Brent plus $1, sometimes Brent plus $2, and Brent is the highest reference crude in the world. So it's good business out there. The second batch of crude is approximately 4,500 barrels per day of BHP crude, which is called Calypso crude. That also is exported out of Galiuta at a different tank farm. That comes from the Angostura field, and that, again, is inspected by the Ministry of Energy whenever there's a shipment. The rest of the crude that makes up the 73,000 barrels is approximately 43 to 45,000 barrels of crude, used by a series of operators and largely Petrotrin. And all that 43 to 45,000 barrels of crude that is not exported ends up at the Point-of-Peer refinery. So crude is not like Zabuka. You can't thief crude and put up a stall and go and sell it. It is a system. And the system involves custody transfer for export, and then all that reaches to the refinery. However, the process to take that 45,000 barrels of crude to the refinery is a very complicated labyrinth of pipelines that ends up in two places. The Bernstein tank farm, which is in Forest Reserve, which collects crude from 15 fields, which is called Western District, which is Trinmar crude, and Western Trinidad crude, like Point Fortin, Parrylands, Guapo, what have you. Then that is fiscalized there and shipped to Point-of-Peer. And then there's the Barrackport tank farm that fiscalizes around 18 fields coming out of some Galiuta production that was formerly Tesoros production, that is now Trinity, Guayguari, Navet, Biche, Goudreau, all these fields, Pinal, Barrackport, Catsil, that goes into the Barrackport tank farm. And that Barrackport tank farm eventually ships oil to Point-of-Peer. Now, throw your mind back to when Petrotrin had owned all the assets. So a field production when Petrotrin was owning all the assets. The fiscalization of crude per field, let's say Catsil, for example. If Petrotrin owned the Catsil, like when Shell owned it and when Trintok owned it and when Petrotrin owned it, you fiscalize oil at Catsil and you pump it to Barrackport. The reason for the fiscalization measurement is largely for production purposes and for reservoir management purposes. However, with the introduction of the lease operatorship and the farm out, that fiscalization process is no longer an internal process. The fiscalization process is now a point of sale, where you transfer equity ownership. That is why it's called custody transfer, from one owner to the next. So if a Caesar unto Caesar, this discrepancy could have been attributed to whatever reason. But now it is a point of sale. So when you sign off on the crude that was shipped, you sign off automatically saying, I am authorizing payment for the volume of crude. That's where the issue comes in now. And that is the system that we are looking at. And just two final technical points. Is the concept of overage and shortage. That is what raised the red flag. Because, as I said, you can't sell crude like Zabuka. The only crude that could reach the refinery is what you produce. Can't go nowhere else, except there's a leak on the line and there's some pollution. But if you take out that, the only crude that could reach the refinery is crude that was produced and fiscalized. So there's a system called overage and shortage. So if exploration and production say they produce 40,000 barrels of crude, and the refinery says, I receive 39,000, that is called a shortage. If exploration and production says, I produce 40,000 barrels, and Point of Peer says, I receive 41,000 barrels, that's an overage. The tolerance limit for overage and shortage is 0.5%. And what happens normally over a month, it normalizes itself. So the net effect is almost zero. So that some days you'll have a slight overage, some days you'll have a slight shortage. But through time, it normalizes itself. And this red flag was raised because of the significant shortage that was reported by the refinery in terms, and that was what commissioned the audit report. In terms of the measurement system, because I want the facts to be known, because you could just talk, but if you don't understand what happens out there, you can draw some wrong conclusions. There are two types of measurements that take place. It's the old manual method of tank gauging, and that is in accordance with the American Petroleum Institute API codes and guidelines. All it does, Senator Mark had alluded to it in his quoting from the report, you do a high gauge, you start to pump, do a low gauge. When you finish pump, you take a low gauge, calculate the difference, and that is the volume that you will ship. In more recent time, there's an API approved, what they call LAC unit, which is least automatic custody transfer, that is very digitally measured. So there's a record of digital measure. Obviously, the better system is the LAC system. But the LAC system is expensive, and it is now being installed in Petrotrin on a phased basis, okay? Because it doesn't make economic sense to place a LAC unit on every pipeline and on every transfer from one tank to the next. So these are some of the technical issues that are involved in this matter. But Mr. Vice President, let me now bring some clarity to the role of the ministry in a matter like this. The ministry has a regulatory function under the Petroleum Act. And then I, as Minister of Energy, through the ministry, has a line responsibility for Petrotrin. So Petrotrin reporting lines are twofold. One, to Corporation Sole, which is their shareholder, which is the Minister of Finance, and on operational matters, to the line ministry, which is the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. But let me just deal with the regulatory function. To drill for and produce petroleum in this country, you need what is called an exploration and production license. You have to have a license to explore and produce petroleum. That license is granted by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry. And it complies with the Petroleum Act, the license, and the sublicense. Now, under the Petroleum Act, the principal licensee, in this case, is Petrotrin. They can grant a sublicense to some other operator to operate the field on their behalf. However, it is the principal licensee who reports the production and is accountable to the ministry. So in that sense, the ministry has no direct dealings with A&V drilling because they are sub-licensing of Petrotrin. The ministry deals with the head licensing, which is Petrotrin. Petrotrin reports the production and reports every other matter pertaining to the field. And I just quote clause 24C of the Act, and it states the issue of a sublicense in no way relieves the licensee from the obligations and duties imposed on him by this Act, or the regulations, or the Petroleum Taxes Act, or the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act. So in other words, the granting of a sublicense doesn't relieve the licensee of the responsibility to report and to comply with the terms of the license. And I just wanted to make that point extremely. Now, Mr. Vice President, let me not conclude, but deal with my final point, or major point, and that is the concept of the lease operatorship, farm out, and IPSC model. This hitch, or however you want to call it with A&V drilling, I don't want it to be interpreted that it casts serious doubt on the whole concept of lease operatorship, farm out, and incremental production services contract. Because as we speak, Petrotrin's land crude production is around 24,000 barrels per day. Half of that, 12,000 barrels, comes from this commercial model. And that is production Petrotrin would not have had it not been implemented in this model. There are, as we speak, 24 small lease operators, 10 farmies, farm-out operators, and 7 incremental services production contracts. A lot of these are local entrepreneurs who have invested millions of dollars into the energy sector. All we hear about is BP and Shell and EOG. But this model has made room for local entrepreneurs. Neil and Massey has gotten into operatorship. I'll call some of the names. Lease Operators Limited, long-standing, contrary to what Senator Mark would have said. That's the Brash family, prominent family in South Trinidad. East Coast Drilling and Workover Limited from Guayguayari. I am from Mayaro. I tell both Al was a contractor with Texaco. It's Al's son running that now. Born and bred in Guayguayari. Local entrepreneur. Hydrocab Limited. Oxley Paul, Faizabad. Senator Chris. Oxley Paul, Faizabad. Faizabad man. Oilfield entrepreneur. Doing well. Hydrocab started off as a service company, doing wireline work in the Faizabad Forest Reserve area. Today, Hydrocab is a producer of petroleum. Trinidad Wireline Limited. Krishna Prasad and Associates on the farm outside. My good friend, always trying something new. Always innovative. Right now, his champion cause is CO2 injection. And it makes sense because it will cut our carbon emission and our greenhouse gas effect because we committed to Paris. And then you're taking a waste product that is pumped as pollutant into the atmosphere, piping it down into the oil fields, and injecting it back into the wells to enhance soil recovery concept. pioneering the cause. API Petroleum Company Limited, out of Avocat. Faizabad, entrepreneurship again. So there are a lot of small companies. There was Primera Oil that was owned by CL Financial. I think they've sold the interest there now. But this whole model has revolutionized the petroleum space in onshore Trinidad. Because Petrotrin has some major challenges. This is a challenge that has reared its ugly head in recent times. But Petrotrin challenges are more fundamental than that. And I don't want us to get carried away. I'm not downplaying this at all. But Petrotrin has serious challenges, as Senator Mark said in some of his opening remarks. Imagine the lifting cost for a barrel of crude in Trinma, which is Petrotrin's best field. That is just the operating cost to lift a barrel of crude in. That's not to drill a well, you know. It's $43.89 per barrel. You're barely getting that for the price of the crude. So if you have to invest to drill a well, how are you paying back for your capital? The lifting cost for Petrotrin for land operation is $39.86 per barrel. And listen to what lease operatorship and farm out operators have brought to the table. Under a petroleum license, you have to pay royalties to the state. So for every barrel of crude you produce and you sell, 12.5% comes out of that from the top, with no deductions. Because royalty, the concept of a royalty payment, that's why we have imposed the 12.5% royalty on gas now. It is that once you are producing a depleting asset, a depleting resource, the state has a right to extract economic rent because it is not renewable. And that is the basis for the 12.5% royalty. So these lease operators produce their 200, 300, 400, 500, some of them 1,000, some 2,000 barrels per day. The first call on their revenue is royalty, 12.5%. And here is where the story gets intriguing. Because they were granted a sub-license from Petrotrin, Petrotrin charges them an overriding royalty. And for the lease operators, the average overriding royalty is 23%. So here you have a company having to invest its own capital, produce oil, and out of their gross income, the state takes 12.5%. No deductions yet, eh? Petrotrin takes 23% as an overriding royalty. So that's 23 and 12. That is 2 and 1, 3, 35%. Coming out from your gross revenue before you start to talk deductions for your expenses and making a profit. And they still survive. And they still have money to re-inject back into the business. So if this economic model is not successful, tell me what is. So it is the intention of this administration to continue along this program because we think it is a valid economic model, and added to which your cost structure is important when you're going after stranded reserves or low productivity wells. Because what happens in the cycle of an oil field is that you find an oil field, it produces well, it is run by a big company, and then when the economics no longer suits the big multinationals, they farm it down into smaller operators. The classic example of that is the major oil fields of the East Coast, which is Tikpu and Saman. When I was a young man growing up in Mayaro, in 1977, those 3 oil fields were making 177,000 barrels of oil per day. What is the production now? 15,000 barrels. But when the production started to decline over the decades, and it was no longer economic for BP to operate the field, they farmed it out to Repsol. Repsol was a smaller company with a more attractive cost structure to operate an asset like that. And Repsol operated for a decade and a half. Good. And then it became uneconomic for Repsol. Because Repsol, while they're much smaller than BP, they are still a fairly large Spanish company. And as we speak, 2 years ago, Repsol sold the fields to a French company called Perenco. And Perenco's model is how to develop old and stranded fields and bring it back into life. Perenco went into Angola with something like 30,000 barrels a day. And right now, their production is 400,000 barrels a day. Okay? I personally have high hopes for Perenco in Trinidad and Tobago. I've had a presentation for them recently, and I think they know what they're about, and I keep my fingers crossed that they will add value to the asset. But in closing, Mr. Vice President, is that, yeah. At the end of the day, the solution to Petrotrin is twofold. They have to get indigenous crude production up, and they have to do something about the refinery to retrofit it to start to produce products, a product mix that has a higher value. On the exploration and production side, the only way you can increase production, the only way I know how to increase production, and the only way anybody who have been in the oil industry know how to increase production is to drill wells. But you know how do you drill wells? You need money. Capital injection is the only way out for Petrotrin. So here you have a company that its only mode of survival in the short and medium term is to invest significantly into its asset base. Where does it get the capital from? It can't borrow because they're already 13 billion in debt, it's reaching up to their nose. They have a bullet payment of $680 million that come first quarter 2019. They're generating no working capital on their own. Good? And their shareholder obviously has no money to give them or to inject into the business anymore. So here you have a company with an asset base that has potential. What it needs is capital, human resource, and technology, most importantly. So it is in that context I recommend to this House that we continue along this program, irrespective of what is happening to Iran V drilling and workover, and that will come to a conclusion in due course. So, Mr. Vice President, what I attempted to do most importantly is to put this whole issue in context. And let me close by quoting Chairman Espine of Petrotrin once more. We had that quote at the beginning, and I want to close with it. While we plan to take decisive action, we need to ensure that any claim or action we take is not impeded by a misstep. In this case, doing it right is more important than doing it quickly. I thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this motion advanced by Senator Mark really focuses on three issues: the broad issue of Petrotrin, the suspension of a contract, and the referral of a matter to a joint select committee. Mr. Vice President, as both Senator Mark, the mover of the motion, and Senator Khan, first responder from the government, indicated, everything seems to be amiss with Petrotrin. Perennial losses, highly indebted, so much so that the debt was downgraded recently, and there are payments coming due in the first quarter of 2019, and I am not sure from where the organization will obtain the funds to make that payment. Will it be able to borrow and repay, or will it have to call upon the Ministry of Finance for some assistance so that it could meet its obligations? As Senator Khan indicated, there is the issue of an inefficient refinery. There is, in the overall structure of Petrotrin, from my understanding of the business model, a labor to capital ratio in the organization, inclusive of the refinery, that is higher than international norms. I'm sure the Minister of Energy will be able to tell us. Refineries of similar sizes in the rest of the world will have a different labor to value of capital ratio. So that when I look at Petrotrin's organizational structure, I see, Mr. Vice President, similarities with another organization 20 years ago called Caroni 1975 Limited. What characterized Caroni in 2000 was what really we are seeing with Petrotrin now. And you ask yourself, as I asked myself in the year 2000, why was the sugar producer, and I'm not getting off the topic, but I'm looking at the similarities, and I am analyzing the point so as to come to a decision on the motion. Why was Caroni Limited making losses year after year, heavily indebted to, unable to turn a profit from the production and the refining of sugarcane into sugar, whereas producers in Guyana and in Fiji and in Australia, using the same sugarcane, were able to produce sugar at a much lower cost than Caroni was. And when you looked at the internal structure of Caroni then, you saw that this was an organization that needed to be restructured. I make this statement, Mr. Vice President, because I produced perhaps what was maybe the last report on behalf of the All Trinidad Sugar and General Workers Trade Union on how to restructure Caroni so that maybe it could become a viable enterprise. The report exists, I'm sure, somewhere in the archives, but we know that Caroni, my recommendation at the time was that over a 10-year period, we actually restructure. We do not restructure immediately, because immediate restructuring, call it the cold turkey approach, was going to have certain dislocations. But the issue of Petrotrin is one, given the state of finances, which cannot continue. The Minister of Finance as line minister, I am sure, as the policy-setting ministry, the regulatory arm of the energy sector, must be concerned currently with the structure of the entity and the need to make it much more efficient, given the fact that the finances simply do not permit much waste at this time. So that's one plank of the motion. We need to be looking at Petrotrin in a serious way. But second, there is the issue of the termination of a contract for, as the motion indicated, be it resolved that immediate action be taken by the Ministry of Finance as corporation sole to suspend the operator's contract while investigations into the audit committee's report are ongoing. Well, I don't know what really are the terms of the contract itself. Because can a ministry of finance or any other ministry simply suspend a contract without the power to suspend being contained in the contract itself? I need to see what the contract is for these farm operators. If Petrotrin certainly has the power to terminate the contract, then I think I would leave it up to the board of Petrotrin and the management of Petrotrin to make that decision, to advise the minister that we think we have the power to so do. But without information on knowing what the powers are, what is contained in the contract, I've never seen one, so I don't know if that power exists and whether the overcharging for products that you have delivered gives you the power to suspend or not is a matter I think we need to look at the company, the board, and the Ministry of Energy to determine. So I am a little bit reluctant and skeptical to recommend or to accept that while investigations are ongoing, that a contract ought to be suspended or terminated. What, in fact, I would like to see is that if it, in fact, has been determined that internal auditors and external auditors have concluded and the company in question has agreed that there was overbilling, because that is what it is, there is overbilling, then we refund the amount forthwith. There should be a refund of the amount that we overcharged. And this matter of overpayment affects too a matter arose this afternoon during question time on the termination benefits of state employees, their gratuity payments. Before these gratuity payments are made, the Comptroller of Accounts will look and see whether there were any overpayments by the state. And we have seen overpayments for a number of reasons. People were paid while they were not supposed to be paid. The Comptroller of Accounts looks at it and deducts that amount before the final gratuity is paid. So I think we need to be looking at whether the amount in question is going to be refunded or not refunded. But we need further information on the terms and conditions of the contract itself, because if we don't understand the terms and evaluate the terms, we may really be recommending a measure that will put the company, Petrotrin, in a situation where it is subject to litigation that it cannot afford. And one has to therefore understand that really there is a process. A procedure need not be time-consuming, but we should, in my mind, allow the internal processes to run its course. We should, because the situation, as from my reading of it, is that the internal auditors were able to pick up a problem. It was verified by the external auditors, and therefore I think there has to be an internal company procedure to rectify the situation and to ensure it does not happen again. That is what it's supposed to do, because this is not peculiar to Petrotrin. Again, I come back to Caroni 1975. In Caroni 1975, there was a problem too of individuals selling sugar cane that they did not deliver to the scale. An arrangement occurred, and this was revealed to me by individuals who weighed cane. The weigher of the cane occupied a position of trust. The farmer brought his sugar cane into the scale, and if there was an arrangement between the farmer and the scale weigher, and the farmer delivered 10 tons, the scale weigher will simply say, well, okay, I'll bill 11 tons. But the problem with that is I will create some cane, is that in agriculture, there is something known as a linear production function. In a linear production, as in petroleum too. Because to produce 1 ton of sugar, you require 10 tons of cane. So it couldn't be that Tate and Lyle producing 1,000 tons of sugar in a week and was billed, it's supposed to be billed for 10,000 tons of cane. So it produced, the technical operators saw 1,000 tons of sugar, and they know, well, okay, out of this 1,000 tons of sugar, we ought to pay for 10,000 tons of cane. They see 11 tons, 12 tons, and so quickly, the sugarcane company was able to pick it up and to identify too who the culprits at the cane weighing stations were, so that that scheme could not last very long in the cane industry. There were technical processes because you had, again, internal auditors, individuals who were checking the output and who knew exactly how much sugarcane would have to go into that. Again, in the field of agriculture, 2.4 pounds of feed to 1 pound of flesh in the production of poultry. I don't know if that ratio still exists, but you know that if you have supplied so many pounds of feed, you expect so many pounds of flesh at the end of an 8-week period. And these ratios exist so that in a short period of time, any malfeasance by anyone is going to, of course, be picked up. Again, in agriculture, you will find, so the point I'm raising is that this issue is not peculiar to the oil industry. It is characteristic of industries, of which agriculture is an industry, in which inputs are purchased, they are processed, and because along the line you are going to get individuals who have some trust repose in them, they can violate this trust hoping that they will get away with it. But if the entire production process is monitored, you will see slippages and you will be able to identify where the leakages are. Because if you don't, in a profit-making enterprise, you are going to find yourself out of business. Tate and Lyle was able to do that very well. I don't know if Caroni 1975 was able to track that issue of overpayment for canes. So that what we have here is a situation where internal auditors were able to identify a particular problem, and the economics of the thing is simple. Individuals who can get something for really little will grab at the opportunity. There is, of course, fraud. There is fraud, potential fraud everywhere, and companies must put internal processes to minimize and to rectify as soon as possible. So that I await the outcome of the internal investigations of the company, and I want to see exactly what they will be doing. I hope they are refunded for all overpayments, and at the same time, I would like to see that the company itself, with the assistance of external auditors, are able to ensure that this situation does not continue for a prolonged period, and that the ratio identified by Senator Khan of 0.5% of slippage is maintained over a normal time, because slippages can occur for various reasons. The gauges may be malfunctioning, something with a pipeline, whatever it is, and that each industry has its norm for what is known as shrinkage. In the retail sector, Walmart says it bills 3% of its merchandise to be shrunk. Shrinkage, and then they say, well, who are the people who help themselves to Walmart merchandise? Is it we the people? They said no. Usually it is employees who have developed techniques of taking Walmart merchandise, putting out in the garbage, have a relationship with the garbage truck collector who will then take it somewhere and divvy it up. It affects Walmart. So that I'm saying this matter is not peculiar. It is not acceptable, but it is something that every agency has to look at and to ensure that it could minimize, if not eliminate completely. So when it comes to the suspension of a contract, I think I would really leave that to the company itself. I would leave it to the terms and conditions of the contract, and we do not want, under any situation, for Petrotrin to be subject to undue litigation. Lawyers love to make money when, even though their clients may be wrong, lawyers will make money by filing these claims saying that the rights of their clients were infringed upon. I think let us understand the terms of the contract and let us obtain whatever refund Petrotrin is due. But again, I support the position of Senator Khan in that what is happening now is this. In the budget, the government of the Republic, the Minister of Finance, I think budgeted a price of oil of some $52 a barrel. But when I look at WTI today, I see it is 57.85. Brent is usually $5 more. And as Senator Khan said, we normally get $1 something more for Brent on some of our crude. So I think it is fair to say we have budgeted at 52. We could easily obtained $60 a barrel for 2018, based upon the following: inventory levels in the world, and the recent deal Russia and OPEC concluded to suppress production up to the end of 18. If that deal holds, we can expect a price higher than what the government budgeted for. I am hoping in the public interest that that happens. Unfortunately, a good bit of that surplus is going to go into interest payments. So as it comes in, petroleum revenue is going to go out in interest payments. That's just how, unfortunately, our macroeconomy is now structured. But in that context, the reason I will not recommend the suspension of the contract is this. I would want the errant partners to be penalized. Everybody wants them to be penalized after due process. But we also want as much oil to be pumped now in Trinidad and Tobago, given that the prices are getting better. And it takes a while for individuals to mobilize their material for the oil sector. You just don't decide tomorrow to get into the oil business. You have to acquire a great deal of things, including your staff. And I think what we have to do is to really ensure that we can get more of these producers producing bona fide oil, not saying that they're producing, but so that we could expand our output from 73,000 per day barrels per day to maybe 74, 75, and I think the Ministry of Energy should have a target maybe by next year if we can get up to 80,000 barrels. It seems reasonable, it seems doable, and if we can get more of these operators to start to contribute, we will, because the only way we will raise more revenue now is by producing a bit more. You see, the price is so attractive. As much as we could produce with the facilities we have, we should, and if we can expand, I will say it is in the public interest to so do. So that I will want to recommend that the issue of the suspension of a contract, it be something I leave up to Petrotrin, but at the same time, I want for there to be refunds, but let us encourage more and more of these domestic operators in our industry so that we can expand both inland and offshore. The third point, you see, is an interesting one now, and that is referring the matter to AGSC. Mr. Vice President, I want to refer to the standing orders, with your leave, of course. And under Standing Order 91, General Functions of Departmental Joint Select Committees. Under 91E, it said that a departmental committee, of which the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises is one, investigate and inquire into all matters relating to the assigned ministries, departments, and bodies as they deem necessary. See, as they deem necessary, that is the members of the Joint Select Committee, or as may be referred to them by the House or a minister. The standing orders are very clear with respect to the matters which fall within the ambit of the Joint Select Committee. It is to investigate and inquire into all matters relating to the assigned ministries as they deem necessary. Joint Select Committees regulate their own affairs. Joint Select Committees are set up as per the standing orders, but once they are established and the Senate and the House both agree on the membership of these committees, the members of that committee regulate their own affairs. They decide what the work program is. They decide what the adjustments to the work program will be. I've had experience now in, I think, 6 or 7 of these Joint Select Committees, and in every one of them, the committee decides what is going to be its area of interest. The way in which the JSC is, of course, composed is that the government has the majority of members on the JSC. Doesn't matter who the government is. It could be the party to which Senator Khan belongs or the party to which Senator Mark belongs. Whichever party is in government, they have the majority on the Joint Select Committee. The Joint Select Committee, of course, does not represent government or opposition. It represents the parliament now as a legislative arm. But the composition is predetermined. And what that composition then does is that, of course, it gives the government the majority of the say. But, you know, in the Joint Select Committee, of which I am a chairman, Social Services, the composition is never a matter, a problem, in that we have adjusted, we have changed, we have regulated our procedures, we have gone on our side visits. I'd imagine in other cases it may or may not be. But you see, what the standing order says is that as the members deem necessary, or as may be referred to them by the House or a minister. And this, I think, is very critical. It says that the House, and by the House, I mean that to be the government, because the government has a majority in the House, or a minister. So a minister would like to have a matter referred to a Joint Select Committee. It is referred to them, and the House refers, they are duty-bound to consider it. But can I ask the Senate to refer a matter when the standing orders do not give me that power? I go again, Mr. Vice President, to the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Under Standing Orders 95, the Committee on Foreign Affairs says, the committee of which I was once a member, I am a member again. I thank my colleague, Senator Ramkissoon, for graciously allowing me to serve once again on Foreign Affairs. The Committee on Foreign Affairs shall have the duty of considering from time to time and reporting whenever necessary on all matters relating to the foreign policy of the government, and so on, but on C, other matters relating to foreign policy as may be referred to it by the House. So the procedure in the standing orders indicate quite clearly that the House can refer a matter, or a minister can refer a matter. Certainly, it specifically states the Committee on Foreign Affairs and also on the general functions. But nowhere did it state that the Senate has the power to refer a matter. That does not mean, in my mind, that we are prevented from so doing. I am sure there is, and I will come to where I would like to see the motion being amended. I think that if we were to amend the standing orders, now I can't really prejudge, but if the standing orders were amended under 91E to say that investigate and inquire into all matters relating to the assigned ministries, departments and bodies as they may deem necessary, or as may be referred to them by the House, the Senate, or a minister. You see, if the standing orders were amended that way to specifically include the Senate, then I would have absolutely no hesitation to refer the matter to the Joint Select Committee. But I am very reluctant to interfere with the workings of a Joint Select Committee. Unless we change the standing orders, and these standing orders are duly debated in this chamber, and we amend it to include the Senate, I would like to think that currently the Joint Select Committee system should be continued as is, unless we change the standing orders, and we allow the government and our minister to refer matters as they see fit, specifically in foreign affairs. In foreign affairs, where there is a need, Mr. Vice President, for us to have a united front internationally, there was a requirement, and I did, in fact, participate with the Quartet when the Quartet was referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs, so that you needed to get the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on board with respect to this particular arrangement in the CARICOM. What, however, I would recommend, so I would not want to, as a Senate, indicate that I want to compel any Joint Select Committee to consider. I would recommend that the Joint Select Committee, and it should not only include the Ministry, the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises. There is a role here for the Ministry of Energy. And that, you see, if the last line could read, be it further resolved that the matter of the efficiency of Petrotrin, be referred to the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises for its consideration, then I think that is acceptable, because it means that Petrotrin, as Senator Mark indicated as he moved the motion, is wider than this issue of people overbilling. I know, Mr. Vice President, there is a concern with white-collar crime in Trinidad and Tobago. The FCB IPO has not yet made it to prosecution. We don't know what the state of the investigation is. It appears as though white-collar crime is not something that we take seriously. One hopes that this matter will involve the fraud squad, it will involve the police, it will involve the director of public prosecutions, and that Petrotrin will, of course, keep the matter alive. If they do not, the Minister of Energy is here in this chamber to answer questions onto the state of the investigations and to keep the momentum alive, and I think there is a recourse for the Senate. But as it stands, I will not be supporting the motion to suspend the contract, nor to refer the matter to the Joint Select Committee, because I think the standing orders do not currently give me that power. What I will do, however, is recommend to the Joint Select Committee that they look at Petrotrin in a serious way, and once they bring Petrotrin into the public hearing, both in camera and out, I am sure all of these issues will be ventilated at the appropriate time. Mr. Vice President, my time is up. I thank you.
Honourable members, I think now is a very good time to take the tea break. So this House will now stand suspended until 5 p.m.